So we're trying to make a dynamic video? Or you like coming all the way over here? Like what, are you trying to show my like teeth and like my Invisalign thing? Yeah, it's nice, right? Anyways, today, welcome to Exotic Car Hacks, and we are talking about the McLaren P1. Now, you might be wondering, well, why are we talking about this? I thought we had already talked about it. Well, guess what? We can talk about something more than once, which is pretty exciting. You know, when I originally bought this car about 6 months ago or so, a lot of you guys said I was an idiot, which is okay. A lot of people say I'm an idiot because they just want to say I'm an idiot. I don't really know what the purpose of that is. But you said I was an idiot because I had overpaid for this car and it was unlikely that I was going to do well because, oh yeah, wait, I remember. Some of you idiots said that we're going through a recession, so it would make no sense and values would tumble. And what an idiot, he paid, you know, almost $2 million for a car that wasn't worth that, and now we're going to a recession, everything's gonna collapse, and you'll be able to buy it from me for half of that. Well, guess what? You were wrong again! And I was right. Who's Fraba? You see, like I'm doing the thing in like Bad Boys when he rubs his ears. I would rub my cock, but it wouldn't work. You know, because we're on YouTube. Are you showing them? No, okay. You're showing them my ears or my cock? Which one?
They both the same size.
Okay, all right. Well, anyways, so we're back at this. And you asked me an interesting question. What did I sell this for? Well, I'm not gonna tell you guys because you're not entitled to this information. Instead, I'm going to tell it to the members of Exotic Car Hacks. And the only way you can become a member of Exotic Car Hacks is clicking the link in the description and actually joining us in the greatest car community ever made. But this car, what we're gonna talk about today is two key fundamental kind of ideologies. The first one is, was the P1 everything that we thought it was, and did it live up to its name? And then the second thing is, where do I see future values for these? Are they still a good buy, or are they basically kind of hit their peak? So we'll actually start talking about the car itself. So as you know, when I originally bought this car, it needed a few repairs. You saw it on my video, and everything in it was fixed to perfection. Thanks again to my friends at Excel Racing. We later added these one-of-a-kind, incredibly beautiful LMR homage wheels from AL13. A big shout out to them for working with me on 3 different sets until the perfect offset, perfect lip and face combo was established, and then we're able to make this flawless P1. So after all that, the question is, was the P1 truly enjoyable? Well, I'm gonna tell you something that I think is always unpopular to a lot of people. The first thing is that the P1 was ahead of its time in 14. It was one of the 3 hybrid supercars or hypercars that really set the stage for the future. The LaFerrari, the P1, and the 918. Many tests would argue that the 918 was better, others LaFerrari, others the P1 was more raw and exciting. Each of these tests was subjective to the driver and what their intent was with the car. Now, having driven all 3, I will tell you that I'm probably a bigger fan of the 918 from a usable standpoint, a LaFerrari from a wow statement, but the McLaren still holds a very specific place in everybody's heart because it was really exciting aesthetically. Like, you have to understand that in 14, having a full carbon car like this with this type of front end and this big wing was a very exciting symbol of pure insanity and awesome like track car. And the thing is that the P1 was also docile enough to be driven on the street and wild enough to take on the track, right? Like a perfect porn star. The issue with the P1 from a, not 2014 standpoint, but 2022 standpoint, is that it did a lot back then, but it doesn't offer any level of comfort like the other 2 did. You see, when you drive a LaFerrari or 918, you don't get all the rocks all the time clicking everywhere and the noises and the feeling that the carbon fiber is just almost too light. In a way, it's great for the track, but for the street, it almost doesn't provide enough insulation, in my opinion. This was my argument with the Senna and why it was just so difficult to drive a Senna to dinner or somewhere, because it just wasn't logistically possible. So the argument is really, is the P1 a really great car in 22, or has it been outdone? And the argument would be that the 918 Spider, it's still a pretty great car. And I would also argue that the LaFerrari has retained its wow factor quite a bit. And I think this is where McLaren just made one key mistake. And I think this is something that I personally gonna give a lot of credit to Porsche and a lot of credit to Ferrari for that McLaren didn't do. If you take a look at this front end, this is a very familiar front end, because this front end looks exactly like a 650S. I mean, yeah, you don't get the same hood, but you get the same shape, you get the same headlights, and you get the same idea. And so this creates the lack of differentiation from this car, from a 650S or a basic 570S or McLaren, to the average person like walking the street. So yes, an enthusiast will clearly know a P1, the name, and go apeshit over this. But a normal person will not be able to differentiate between all the different McLaren models. And where I feel like the P1 has failed, let me rephrase that, McLaren has failed the P1, which I think is a better thing, is that they made other McLarens too similar to this. And you don't really have other Ferraris that look like the LaFerrari, and you don't have other Porsches that look like the 918. And I think that is the only flaw in this car. It is that the car itself is superb. The design is beautiful. It's one of the sexiest looking cars ever made. But yet McLaren toned down that success and basically toned down that design by having other cars look like it. And I think that is my only disappointing true factor with the P1. It isn't as exclusive in design as the other two hypercars of its time, which really retain their kind of like high on a pedestal kind of mode by not being imitated by its own, little brother or little sister variants. So the P1, they kind of did that to it. And I think that's the only thing that really took the luster away from this car, was that and that alone. And I think that, one of the things you get with this car is it's very hard to drive on the street in race mode. But look at it. It's absolutely superb in race mode. It's superb because it looks low, it looks exciting, it's got the big wing. This is the differentiated look that you can't get a 570S or 650S to duplicate, but yet you can't drive it like that on the street. So it's like, it loses that status appeal and that excitement, to me anyways, on the street. So that was kind of the problem. The other argument, which we're gonna share in a future video, is really comparing the P1 to the SF90. The SF90 is ultimately what a P1 is in a very streetable form. So is it better, and how much better? And then, or is it not as good, or what does it do better or not? Something we'll talk about in a future video. But this is my argument with the P1, is that was kind of my only objection to it. The design is so beautiful, especially from the rear end. It's like pure UFO. And it's so unique and fantastic that was something that just you don't see. But you really don't get that you get it when the wing's up, and you don't get that on the street again, because you would rip half the carbon kit off the car because of how bad streets are. So, it's this argument where it's perfect, it's not perfect, it's flawless for the track, it's just not that perfect for the street. And it's got a lot of conflicts going on based on what's out now in 22. It is a perfect modern marvel of what 2014 was, and there was nothing like it. And I'm just so blessed to have been able to experience it for a few months, enjoy it, and still, walk away in a fairly good position. So that was kind of my take on the car itself, where I think it fits in with everything else, and if I do believe the P1 as a car is worth it. So for those of you considering buying one, definitely consider it as a hyper, especially if it's part of a collection. I think you'll enjoy it more if you don't have to drive it every day. And with every McLaren, remember, the more you drive them, the less they break down and the better cars they become. So do drive your car, but don't expect it to be as much fun daily. It's also incredibly hard to get in and out of, and the doors are very heavy. So this discomfort doesn't matter on a once a week type of cars and coffee event, but it will matter if you're dailying it, and it does get annoying. The iris system worked perfectly, so there's no issue with the software updates and stuff. That it works beautifully. The Bluetooth works even better than the Aventador. So, really good car overall. Incredible car as part of the collection. So let's talk about values, because Exotic Car Hacks is about being able to understand and forecast values. So again, if you don't know what we do, click the link in the description and understand how to turn cars into assets and into really beautiful investable assets, so you can actually understand how to no longer be a consumer of the system. But for those of you that do know what we do, let's talk about the P1 from a value standpoint. So people have argued that these cars were at the million mark, they went up to $1.2 million, everyone rushed to buy them, they went up to $1.5 million, and now they're nearing the $2 million mark. So, you know, they keep going up. They're now sitting about 2x of MSRP for clean, low mileage cars, which is pretty impressive for a McLaren, and it's a pretty cool thing. 2x MSRP, will it go to 5x, 10x, etc.? So I would argue, and I know this is going to be against unpopular opinion, so we'll have to look 5-10 years down the road and leave this video as a landmark to check if I was right or not. But I would argue that this is going to be the next McLaren like F1 style price increase car that is going to be on the road. So we know that the F1 car with the 3 seats is going bananas, right? Like 10 million plus and going crazy at auctions and stuff when they're low miles. But I think the P1 is the one that's going to follow that trend. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it's iconic for the marquee and its name is already living up to its hype. So it has kind of this, what it is what makes it special. And there's a reason why this will do that more than a Senna. And while I've argued when I compared them that the Senna was still a more modern and more usable hypercar than this, despite the windows, I will also argue that this will do better in values over the next 10 years that a Senna will, even though production numbers are very close to each other. So I would argue that if you are investing in a car, this is probably still going to be one of the most investable and exciting cars on the market under $2 million for a collection. So if you are thinking of buying one, I would argue that it's a good time to pick one up. And I'll tell you why. Because if you look at asking prices and selling prices, there's a good deficit. This tells you that people are going to be willing to take reasonable numbers and not insanely inflated numbers based on what's going on in an auction. In a couple of years, if these cross the auction in the $4 or $5 million range, you will start to realize that this market is long gone, like the Cura GT in the 2 millions, it's long gone. So if you've been thinking of adding a P1, now's a good time to start searching during this kind of recessionary dip that isn't really hurting values, but at least allowing some people that need liquidity to kind of get out there. This is going to be probably the better car to put in your collection based on where values are today and where they could be going tomorrow. I would argue this and the Porsche 918. So the LaFerrari is gone. Price-wise is already like out of control. So if you've really considered these cars, I would consider these 2 cars out of the 3 as the better investment. So we say goodbye to the McLaren P1. It is now going to an incredibly well-known garage in California. Very cool guy. I'm sure he will enjoy it and do crazy mods to it and appreciate it even more. No, it's not the Elite Driven Exotics, but if you know, you know. And I will let him unveil it on his channel and talk about it. But for now, so we say goodbye. This is the last you're going to see the P1 in terms of me driving it or doing anything with it. This is basically it. But for now, hope you've enjoyed the P1 and my thoughts on it. Make sure you leave in the comment, what do you think is next? What do you think is coming? I give you one little hint, it's definitely over $2.5 million. So I'll let you guess what it is. And then of course, like, turn on notifications and subscribe. And I'll catch you on the next video for Exotic Car Hacks.